All right, former federal prosecutor David Katz, now a defense attorney. Let's put your legal skills to work because this is an administration that's come in hot, and already today, a judge has blocked an effort on the part of this administration to do a couple of things. So the courts are busy. The buyout offer is what a judge has paused. The big buyout offer that was extended across the U.S. government to essentially give people 8 months' pay, I believe it was, if they would resign from their positions. Again, it was across government. It was an extraordinary thing given the fact that there was no money appropriated for this plan. They just came in and did it. Now a judge has paused this. Can you speak to its legality and what its future might be?
Well, Mark, that's a great point. It's a nationwide pause. I mean, it's a practical matter. Nothing can be done nationwide because this memo, Musk got a hold of the computer system. They'd been planning this for a while. It's not actually easy to send to all 2 million plus federal employees. They didn't send it to some national security federal government employees, but they hit almost every single one, over 2 million across the country, and then they sent it all at once. So there was this shock and awe element to it. And all you had to do was push the button that said resign. I mean, more than half the people thought it was a joke. But all you had to do was push the button resign and then push send, reply. And basically you had resigned. And supposedly thousands of people resigned. I think some in error, but I think some thinking, wow, I'm going to get 8 months pay. I'm not going to have to go into work because they were working from home. So 8 months I'll get pay. I don't have to basically do any work. I certainly don't have to abide by the go into the office, don't work remotely requirement. And so it seemed very tempting, especially to people who maybe were planning to retire soon or who were planning to leave the government for other reasons. Anyway, a memo had to be sent out to the same 2 million people today by the judge's order, telling them that they didn't have to do anything by Thursday, that it had been basically taken off the table by the court. But it's not taken off the table permanently. The union representing the federal workers has to reply by tomorrow to the federal judge. And then by Monday, there's going to be a hearing. So definitely stay tuned to this one. I think that they tried to do it so fast in this shock and awe way that I think it will get extended. If there's some underlying ability to do this, Mark, it's certainly not to do it on a week's notice. So there'll be some time to think about it. I think anyone who did it in haste will be allowed to rescind. But if they can get the money for it, you see, that's one of the problems. It's not funded at all. And, we had all this Chevron deference thing. And of course, the Republicans love Chevron deference cases when it was their way. When there was something that an agency was doing that they didn't like, all of a sudden, Congress hadn't really bought in. They hadn't made it clear enough in the statute that this was something that could be done, in the trenches. Well, can this really be done in the trenches for over 2 million employees? Did Congress have in mind when they passed any of these statutes, did they make it clear that a new administration could give people 7 or 8 months pay for no work? And that was all funded. That was something Congress wanted to pay for. And also, are they following the rules in the Administrative Procedures Act, which makes it very clear, hey, you have to give notice, you have to put it in the Federal Register, you have to have a comment period. So it may be that they have to go through all of that. But at the end of the day, I believe, yes, they can offer some kind of inducement if they do it properly for people to leave now. They can give them more money. And if I can just mention one thing, on my mother's side, my grandmother was a lifetime federal employee in Washington, D.C. And when Nixon came in after LBJ, Nixon had a program kind of like this, that you would get more pay for a period of time that you weren't actually working. My grandmother took it, or she said, Nixon forced me out of the government. After all these years, a Republican forced me out of the government. And she really regretted retiring. She was one of those people who said, you know what, taking the bus down Connecticut Avenue and going into the Export-Import Bank, that was something I really liked. And I really shouldn't have retired. So all the people out there who are thinking of retiring or leaving the government, generally speaking, they do really noble, public-spirited work. Hang in there. Hang in there. I know it's a drag to commute after you've gotten used to staying home. It's tough if you're raising kids, especially. Much easier to do at home than if you have to schlep into the office every day. But federal government employees, hang in there.
I'm glad you mentioned your mom. I'm glad you mentioned grandmother. Excuse me. I'm glad you mentioned your grandmother and the idea of going into the federal government through different administrations. My dad worked for the government for a long time, and he was really a nonpartisan in a big way. Like sometimes he'd vote Democrat, sometimes he'd vote Republican. He's a very considered, brilliant man. My dad was a brilliant guy. So, but more to the point, I remember when he was Nixon also asked for his resignation because he was high enough that at a certain level you ask for resignations from everyone. It's kind of a pro forma thing. And then he rejected it, and then my dad continued to work. But more to the point, your grandmother, my father, many people work in government and do diligent work and attend to the tasks in front of them and to the mission statement in front of them. And sometimes the government leans left when Democrats win. Sometimes the government leans right when Republicans win. But to the point, and this brings me to the next issue that I wanted to ask you about, the idea that you could go after federal prosecutors and lawyers who are working for the government at the FBI and beyond in any kind of capacity, as Pam Bondi is now doing. She's asking to see everybody who worked in any way on these cases against J6ers, Donald Trump, and the prosecutions that followed involving J6 and beyond. These are, in the main, aren't they, David Katz? Federal employees that are kind of doing what your grandmother was doing. They're attending to the task in front of them, and the task that was assigned was to help with the prosecution or investigations associated with those cases.
This was the largest prosecution in the history of the Department of Justice, including the largest prosecution ever conducted by the FBI. It would have been anomalous if you hadn't worked on it, because they suddenly needed to prosecute a lot of people. Some of them were detained, and it kind of made sense. They brought it at the Capitol. 5 people were killed. Let's never minimize it. Let's never get gaslighted by these people. We all saw it on TV. It was awful. It was hundreds and hundreds of people going in there trying to gouge out the eyes of the guards who worked there, who, of course, totally nonpartisan. They're protecting everybody there, Democrat and Republican. So they need a lot of people, especially if someone was detained. They were especially going to need a speedy trial. And so there were a lot of assistant U.S. attorneys out here in Los Angeles and everywhere else who had to put their all of their devices on D.C. time, on East Coast time, because they had to always remember to work on that schedule, that they had to file something, not by midnight here, but by 9 o'clock here. And so they turned a lot of their clocks back because they had to work on those cases. And likewise with the FBI, there was no partisan aspect to it at all. They needed a lot of bodies on deck because it was an enormous ship of prosecutions that they were having to steer through the federal court systems with the Speedy Trial Act. So this is all, and I would say this, regardless of politics, I don't think there is one FBI agent or special agent or one assistant U.S. attorney who didn't think this was a righteous case. You had a videotape of somebody hammering on the head of some poor guy saying, "I've got kids at home. Please stop beating me." The police officer at the Capitol would say, "I've got kids at home. I've got a family that needs me." Who on earth didn't think that was a righteous case? Who in their right mind? And so it's all this politicization of the Department of Justice by Trump. He's always into projection. So, of course, he says that the Department of Justice has been weaponized against him. No, it wasn't. And in fact, he is weaponizing it. And Kash Patel and some of his other picks are trying to weaponize it. And it's just awful. The good news today is that there's at least been a week-long delay on Kash Patel. So the people who think that he's inevitably going to get in, I'm not so sure about that. We could talk about it if you'd like to. And his taking the fifth. I will say this. When Trump says you've never seen anything like it, no, you've never seen anything like someone nominated to be the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation who himself invoked his rights under the Fifth Amendment. You have a right to invoke your right under the Fifth Amendment, and the people of this country, through their elected representatives and senators, have a right to say, no, you should not be the director of the FBI for that reason and so many others, Kash Patel.
Speak to that then. Now, but before I get to that, I want to get to the Kash Patel thing and the Fifth Amendment invocation. But I want to ask you, just to button this out, she is within her right, Pam Bondi, the new Attorney General, to get those names. As you say, there'll be just leagues and leagues of names, right? Because as you say, it was such a huge case. She's within her right to get rid of all those people?
No, I don't think she's within her right to get rid of those people. There are civil service protections and you can only be removed as an assistant U.S. attorney or an FBI agent for cause. And there's no cause, and there's a civil service panel, and you're entitled to all kinds of due process. So no, the famous one was J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover didn't want to go through those civil rights protections. So if you didn't have your shoes shined or something like that, he would send you to Alaska. But he wouldn't get rid of it.
They can make your life difficult, for sure.
They could probably make your life difficult. You can complain to the Civil Service Commission. You can maybe even file a lawsuit and maybe even win it. There's a lot of them that are being brought right now by the FBI agents. I think there's 2 different lawsuits that are brought by the FBI agents. I think these are higher up ones. And this new acting attorney general, who's Trump's old lawyer, right? Oh, this is every criminal defendant's fantasy, to not only try to get retribution and vengeance against the people who prosecuted you, right? But to try to go after the FBI agents, make their life miserable and stuff like that. It's every criminal defendant's darkest fantasy, and we have it in the White House right now, and we seem to have it with this acting attorney general. I guess he's not acting. I guess he's number 2. He's the deputy attorney general now that Bondi has been approved. And yes, he's said that they were insubordinate because they didn't immediately turn over the names of these FBI agents and the fact that they worked on some of the January 6 cases. Now, when you get discovery, it often says, like an FBI interview, it'll show who the FBI special agent is who interviewed. They were interviewed by Special Agent Jones and Smith. And you see that right in the report. Normally, a protective order, Mark, would not cover that. So it's even in public records in some of the discovery, if it ever got filed in open court. So yes, if you had a diligent private person going through publicly available sources, you could figure out who a lot of those FBI agents were, and they could certainly laboriously do that. But that's not what they have in mind. They want the FBI itself, the top people at the FBI now, to prepare a list and say, here are the dirty 600. Here are the 600 who worked on the Trump case. Put it all in one neat little package. The 2 heads of the FBI didn't do that fast enough now for this deputy attorney general, and he's now saying that they were insubordinate. He's obviously getting ready to try to take them before some civil service panel, and if they resist, his cause is that they were going to be insubordinate for not immediately snapping to and going, yes, here's the dirty 600, and I gave it to you within the 2 days that you demanded it.
It may be a multi-step process, but it feels to me like a purge. I mean, they're trying to purge that agency one way or the other so that they can put in loyalists, and that is their plan. That's Project 2025's plan. I wanted to ask you now to move to Patel. You had mentioned him before. The invocation of the Fifth Amendment, can you put it in some context for us and then tell us why senators did follow up and ask him to provide testimony and he didn't provide it? He was wildly combative and evasive during his confirmation hearing.
Mark, he's an extraordinarily poor choice for the FBI. Sometimes you can imply that someone may be biased. You can try and take from things that they've written. Whenever they don't like one of these federal judges, that the Republicans don't like and that they don't want to approve, they go back and find some writing. And because they always seem to be conservative Southern Republicans. I almost want to say this in a Southern accent, but I won't. But they start asking about your writings. And in your writings, they find some writing from 15 years ago where they say somebody suggested that they were a feminist, or somebody suggested they were in favor of affirmative action. And that one article, they try to beat them with, the Judiciary Committee. Here is a man who published a book with an enemies list as its appendix. It had as its addendum an enemies list. It named people like sitting senators, sitting Congress members, the people who prosecuted Trump after they got grand jury indictments against him. He had an express enemies list, recent vintage. He's written books where Trump is the king, and when the people are attacking the king, traitorously, are actual people that he can go after right now. On top of that, he apparently knew something about Mar-a-Lago. He'd either seen or heard something at this Mar-a-Lago situation where Trump was keeping these documents after he purloined them from the White House in Washington, after he kept them, after he obstructed justice allegedly in not returning them, after allegedly he put up lawyers to lie and misrepresent the situation. Kash Patel knew something about that. That was of interest to the grand jury. When he was called in front of the grand jury, instead of saying, no, that didn't happen, He said, I am the right under the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination not to answer your question because it would be self-incriminating. Since he had a right to say that, it wasn't frivolous, that it would have been self-incriminating, that it would have put himself, Kash Patel, in criminal peril had he answered the question. He was then given immunity. So with immunity, he couldn't be put in criminal peril because he would have immunity for what he answered. He then answered those questions, Mark. It's in a grand jury transcript. Congress is having trouble because the Republicans are in charge of the Judiciary Committee and in charge of the Senate. They can't get that grand jury record. If they made a joint request, the judge would order it turned over and they'd have it the next day. But the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, this old Republican guy, he won't approve it. Suddenly he doesn't want it. Bump, bump, bump. So they say to Kash Patel, you have a right under the First Amendment to tell the world what you said in front of the grand jury. So since you have the right to tell us, you have no protection against telling us, what'd you say in front of the grand jury some months ago? And this man who wants to be the director of the FBI, suddenly it's like, it's like every quote, I don't remember your audit. Well, it was just 2 months ago. Oh, busy life. I don't really remember. This is the guy who's going to be director of the FBI. This was his answer. He doesn't remember. He doesn't recall. Bop, 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 bop. Why don't you get it from the, then they play that circular game, right? Where Kash Patel says, why don't you just get it from the grand jury? Well, they can't get it from the grand jury because the Republican head of the Judiciary Committee is not letting them get it from the grand jury. And then they put that on Fox that, it's another big witch hunt of Kash Patel. It's absolutely righteous, Mark. And at least they put it over for a week. And, different things happen. Remember Kavanaugh? Kavanaugh came so close to not making it because it got put over. And then they went totally to bat for him because he was going to be a U.S. Supreme Court justice. Will they really go to bat all the way for Kash Patel? If he's going to embarrass the Republican senators who voted for him. To me, it's already clear that there's no way the Republicans hold the Senate in 2 years. Trump has acted in such a way that he's dragged down the Republican senators with him. So it's just a matter of holding on. That's why I'm optimistic. Every week that goes by, Mark, there's 100 weeks until the Senate is no longer Republican. And so you get through one of the 100 weeks, you get through 2 of the 100 weeks. By the time you get through 3 of the weeks, you're 3% of the way through.
You're always
Republican control.
You always turn my frown upside down, David Katz. I wonder what the government will look like at that time when those midterms show up.
There'll be elections. The people who say there won't be elections, Mark, there'll be elections. Yes, the Republicans will try to put their finger on the scale of the election like they always do. But with enough, Trump will be so unpopular. By the way, the 51st state, Gaza, will they vote Democratic? Maybe we'll get 2 Democratic senators out of Gaza finally. 2 more Democratic senators. I mean, it's so insane, Mark. It's so insane. I know people say it's distraction, so look over here. Don't look over the terrible things that he's doing with Kash Patel and the civil service. I know part of it is distraction, but he looks so bad. He looks so stupid, okay? When you go to the Thanksgiving party with your Republicans, if you talk about politics at all, ask them, what'd you think about that? We're going to send American troops to hold Gaza. This is a disaster for Israel, trying to have them right next door. And we're going to go jump in the middle of the most fraught war in the world, this unsolvable war.
Well, I mean,
we can have a Riviera, Mark, so we can have if they want to have a Riviera right now. By the way, the country belongs to the Palestinians. They left, in the late 40s. It's incredibly controversial in the Palestinian lore about how they left, and they shouldn't have left. They should have stayed there. They should have, lived with the Jews, and not left. Since they left, they've never been able to return. That's the problem. There's no right of return. They're in these squalid, awful refugee camps, generation after generation. The idea that we're going to build beautiful homes for the people in Gaza, why haven't we built them for the last many decades?
Well, I mean,
for refugees.
Look, Gaza was also, there were Israelis in Gaza, and they withdrew from Gaza. It was quite controversial. There were avocado groves, there were pharmacies, there were factories. It was really a wonderful place, apparently, and they literally had to drag people out. I mean, it was not easy. The residents of Gaza, I'm talking about the Israeli residents of Gaza, didn't want to leave, but they wanted no Jews there in Gaza, and they got them all out, and they set fire to a lot of this stuff, and Gaza really began, as you suggested, this kind of awful plundering that went on with Hamas, et cetera. That's a real shorthand on what's going on, but that's the back and forth. On the one hand, you have so many Palestinians who really do have a right to live there in their homeland, and you have Israelis who feel Also, they've contributed so much to that land, and they also have a biblical right to be there. So I feel in the Middle East, it's all when you walked into the movie. You know what I mean? It's a really, really tough one to both understand and really be fair about. And as you say, I mean, taking a wrecking ball to the whole thing the way Trump has is just crazy. Hey, look, if you want the Riviera and you seem to be so horny to send troops everywhere, go to the actual Riviera. Let's just take that. I mean, it's already built up, and apparently, it's pretty popular. I want to ask you about.
I'm just saying, Mark.
Yeah.
Trump took a big step backwards. The idea that this was somehow clever, this was being so outrageous that it made the Israelis' outrageous position seem even less outrageous. That's not true. He really hurt us in the world, as he has with so many of these things. What he said about the Panama Canal, what he just said about Gaza, it really hurts us in the world. America, to the extent that we're extraordinary, to the extent that people hold us in great esteem around the world, boy, you blow that capital. You blow that capital where people don't want to do what America would like them to do. And so we have to send troops. We have to spend more money on the military, or we decide that that's what we want to do. He really hurts us. And if they ever go off the dollar, there's no imposing sanctions if these BRIC countries go off the dollar.
This is a great point that David Katz is making right now. What I've talked about on this show is the fact that already, because of so many of these edicts that Trump has issued, already these nations that were formerly our allies are beginning to ally with each other, and they're doing it independent of the U.S. They now realize they can't count on the U.S. anymore. And that understanding that the U.S. dollar is this stable currency, and that becomes the currency, the petrodollar, et cetera, if that goes away, we are in huge, huge trouble. I mean, this nation, I don't want to say third world, but we will have the debt of a third world nation and nowhere to dump it. I think you make a great point about that.
I don't think the Chinese Communist government will have the ingenuity and the humanity to do it. But you take something like USAID. If the Chinese did have the ingenuity and the humanity to do it, they would take over every single one of our USAID programs. They would be the great benefactor to Africa and the other third world countries. And they would sock us right in the jaw in a way that's very hard to recover from. Who did this? Who just did this to America? Trump and Musk.
Sure. That's so true. I think also, honestly, China already is. They're not doing the humanitarian stuff as much as you suggested, but their Belt and Roads Initiative is already well launched in the continent of Africa, Latin America, et cetera. I want to get back to a legal question for you. This is a kind of a layup. We sort of knew it would be a legal layup, and that's the two federal judges now in as many days blocking the birthright citizenship order. I mean, that's a constitutional provision. You knew that was going to be blocked. That's why I say it was a layup.
Well, it was a layup. I predicted it. I don't get a Katsadamas point for that one. That was too easy. But when it was a bumper sticker. It was a sop to his most MAGA followers. And again, if he wanted to do something rational about it, they could try to figure out a way to figure who's coming here basically for birth tourism. And they could, in a humanitarian, intelligent way, they could see that someone who's coming here for they're 7.5 months pregnant, why are they coming here? Intelligently not issue a visa to that person if you think that's what they're doing. Go aggressively after what they call birth mills. There are allegedly people who come from China en masse, pay a lot of money to smugglers or just to travel agents to get them over here just to have a baby so the baby will be a U.S. citizen and then they go on with their life. If that's really what's going on, fine. Go after it aggressively. And I want to say something else, Mark, because I said this last week, and a lot of people gave me really favorable comments. I appreciated it. And I had what was a fairly original idea. I haven't heard it other places, which was that if the states should really take over the protection of people like Milley, like Fauci. If they can't litigate in court and get entitlement that the federal government has to give them that protection. These former, Pompeo, the Iranians supposedly have a hit on former Secretary of State Pompeo for an action he took with Trump, whether you agree with it or not. It was his official duty. It was something that he and Trump decided.
This is for the assassination of Soleimani. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And now the Iranians want personal retribution against him. They want to kill him. And he's got a protective detail, which Trump canceled, and he's canceled Fauci's protective details and other ones. If they can't litigate and get their protective detail back at federal government expense, we rich blue states should protect them. And I have the same thought, Mark, about that's something we can afford. You know, we're the fifth largest economy in the world, California. We can afford to protect 5 or 6 people. And so
well, you keep saying that, David Katz, but I mean, the roads in Los Angeles and San Francisco would tell you a different story. I'm just saying there doesn't look like a lot of money floating around.
But Mark, you know how much money we spend in California when we care about a principle, and that's a principle to protect 6 people. I say the same about these FBI agents. If any FBI agent, after actually litigating their case, is fired or terminated, we should hire them in California. There is no reason why California can't have a California Bureau of Investigation, which is better than the FBI. Why shouldn't we? Why shouldn't New York? Why do they just assume, well, this is left up to the feds, the FBI will do such great work? Let's hire those FBI agents in these states. You know, a lot of these crimes that people prosecute in federal court, they can be prosecuted in state court. These people who commit fraud is a state offense, and there's some connection with California. So I think it would be great if we would tell those people, look, litigate your cases, try to stay in the federal government, but if you don't, you're not going to be fired. If you don't want to be fired, you're not going to be fired. You're going to be hired by California, New York, Maryland, one of the rich blue states.
I love that kind of breakthrough concept. I really do. It's super innovative. I want to ask you about Elon Musk, finally, David, in our conversation about the legality of what he's doing. I understand that he's gone in there just like a SWAT team with his 19 to 25-year-old dudes who, he plays Fortnite with, and he goes in and hacks essentially the U.S. Treasury. Now, when I say hacks, to be fair, he was given the green light to do it by what's his name? Barrett, I think his name is, the new Secretary of the Treasury. But what I want to ask you about is the legality. Okay, so these Musk allies, they go in there. They have access to these highly sensitive materials that speak to privacy issues with all Americans and American businesses and even foreign businesses. And I'm wondering, even given that green light, isn't there there must be some legal stickiness to this, I guess is what I'm getting at. And I wondered from you if there was any.
Well, Mark, you're so wise to focus on the fact that there is authorization, and there are like some employees who are part of the administration now who are doing this. So while I think it's outrageous, and I strongly suspect, I'm very, very worried that Musk is doing it for his own personal aggrandizement, either to find out stuff about his competitors and screw his competitors some way. Now, of course, when and if they unleash this against a competitor, the competitors are pretty smart too. If it's the competing company, because no one's buying Teslas anymore, they're buying the competing electric car in California and all these other states, and Musk wants to try to screw that competitor. That competitor has some money to avoid being screwed. And the first time something comes out that's a violation of the Privacy Act, the first time you see something that their lawyers and investigators at the rival firm says, how did Musk know that? They'll bring a huge lawsuit, and they'll sue Musk, who can afford to pay. So can SpaceX, so can Tesla. They can afford to pay an enormous judgment. They'll try to obtain an enormous judgment for violating the Privacy Act and other federal laws like that. So there are ways that Musk can get caught. Also, there's supposed to be ways to track who goes into these computer systems. And so hopefully you can get the footprint. People are worried that they're not just read only, but they're also writing. That these 17-year-olds are also writing in there. They couldn't publish the name of one of them because he's a minor. Think about that.
It's crazy. And to your point on what I was reading early on, and I think it was in a Wired magazine piece, is that they actually did build in backdoor entry for so many of these tech bros to follow up and continue to have access to this system that I'm sure they feel is somewhat antiquated. I mean, the federal computer systems do need to be upgraded in large measure, and I'm sure even the upgraded version that might exist at Treasury probably isn't as current as the ones that these guys are used to working on because they're tech ninjas. But they have built in these sort of a backdoor way to get into these systems on an ongoing basis, and we're able to document that. I'm sure that's a legally actionable case.
Well, some of this may be, legitimate efforts that need to be done. I mean, everyone's talked about the fact that, when you communicate with the IRS on some matters, you have to send them a fax. We had to go run around and find someone who still had a fax or had a machine that was, that was usable as a fax. So we know that they have very antiquated systems, but you know what? They kind of work. Let's keep that in mind too. They kind of work. People do get their Social Security check. And so the idea of going in there and tinkering with any of this stuff, even if he doesn't use it, Musk and his minions don't use it to hurt competitors or exploit it. The nightmare is that they compare who voted Democratic and who's getting a Social Security check, and you have a huge snafu with your federal government checks if you voted Democratic. There's no proof that they've done exactly that yet, but that's the sort of thing that people worry about. But the reason that I think that they'll probably get away with most of this is that, again, the Republicans in the Senate have approved people for these jobs. It looks like they're going to approve this guy a vote. And so hopefully they won't. But, they'll have their people there. The president and his cabinet are supposed to execute the laws. They're executing the law. They're updating the systems. They need to look in there and see what's going on. Now, Musk has already sent out a tweet, an X, whatever they call it now, that, by the way, congratulations to you going to Blue Sky. I'm going to do that too, Mark. But he sent out some kind of thing. He sent out something on X that said that they're looking at Medicare and Medi-Cal because that's where the big fraud takes place. I'm sure there's big fraud that takes place. It's astonishing. They might want to start with the Republican Senator Scott, who has been accused, I think credibly, of running one of the biggest Medicare, Medi-Cal scams in the history of the United States.
I thought it's more than accused.
Extremely rich. He became extremely rich, and now he's a huge Trumpster from Florida.
It's more than accused, David. His company that he was running, I believe they were guilty of the biggest Medicare fraud in history. I mean, look it up. I'm fairly certain that
Google it.
I don't. But again, because of the way we do things here, he wasn't personally having to pay any kind of price. He didn't personally go to prison.
My company did it. I got rich, but my company did it.
But again, Musk's group has, and this is from the Washington Post, officially taken over the White House, formerly known as the U.S. Digital Service, which was renamed on Trump's first day in office as the U.S. Doge Service. His allies are running the GSA, which manages real estate, procurement, and IT, and the Office of Personnel Management, which handles HR. With control of logistics, they're taking extraordinary measures to slash all parts of the government, pushing mass resignations, accessing a Treasury Department payment system, obtaining federal student loan data, and challenging the very existence of the U.S. Agency for International Development. And that's just one prong of this strategy to command the technical guts of the federal government, which undergird everything from login pages for government applications to Social Security to everything else that is now moving to put loyalists in charge of this tech world government-wide. This is an extraordinary thing that's happening, and it's being done by a guy who certainly has the means to bring in technical expertise to take over government.
Well, this is a huge problem, a huge concern. I heard some Democratic senators saying this is a hair on fire moment, that this is one that has to be pushed back within days, because if it's as nefarious as some people fear, they will get information that they can really exploit. And maybe the people who are worried that there won't be any kind of fair vote in 2 years are worried about how this data might be used for those purposes. And of course, there's people who are just scared how they steal from the government. If you could somehow, you read about some fraud and you think, how did somebody steal $200 million? Well, they fooled around with some bank thing, they fooled around with some control at some bank thing. And it's very scary. If they're writing any code, they claim it's read only. But, this guy at the Treasury Department, this is what I don't understand about people like him. He's already a billionaire. What does he need this for? What's his name? Bessender or something
Barrett,
like that?
I think, yeah.
Yeah. Why would he want to be so tarnished by this? You look at who the Treasury secretaries have been. I don't think they said a few things about Mnuchin and stuff like that. But as I think back on Treasury secretaries, they're esteemed. They were esteemed when they went in, they were esteemed for their performance, and they were esteemed when they came out. Why does this Treasury secretary want to do this? He wanted that job so bad, he's going to turn that over to Musk. He's so scared he's going to say no. But I guess he get fired. He thinks, okay, I'll be fired. He doesn't care that I'm this famous billionaire Wall Street guy. Trump will fire me the next week if I say no to Musk. Is that really what he thinks? Won't any of them say no? Because he gave permission. He's the confirmed Treasury Secretary. He gave permission to these people to go into these computer systems. And that's why at the end of the day, I think legally it's going to be a nothing burger. Unfortunately, it's scary as hell, but I think it may be a nothing burger.
Because of the authorization.
If they're writing code and they're not allowed to write code in there, and if people don't get their Social Security checks, of course, then there'll be a huge outcry.
Yeah, there'll be a controversy, but the legality of it is going to be covered up technically. They can write code. They can cover the fact that they wrote code. I mean, they really. Let me just speak to though the Treasury Secretary thing, because you're sending this guy up, and I think you're right about everything you say. But you also know, having worked in Washington, I grew up in D.C. around all these people as well. There's a prestige associated with many of these appointments, and so when you say, why would this billionaire want to be Secretary of the Treasury? I know you're just asking the question rhetorically, but I think the reality is that these guys want that shimmer. They want that profile of having been Secretary of the Treasury. His autograph will be on all the currency. I mean, it's a little crap like that, David Katz, but they want to be in the parade. And the way to be in the parade is to shut your mouth and do what the king wants. And that's kind of what Washington has become.
But he's already in the parade, is my point. It seems to me this is one that he could have stood up to. So,
I see.
The fact that I think one of the reasons Musk wanted it so bad, there's two different aspects to it. I think one is what use he could really make of it. And I think he's fascinated to figure out what use he can make to, for self-aggrandizement and for punishing his economic and political enemies, perceived enemies by Musk. But I think the second thing is just the look of it is great. Just the idea that maybe he knows your health history. You're his rival. Maybe he's got his health history. Maybe he's got the disciplinary record of some government investigator who's after him. Because, it's terrible. People voted for Trump, so that prices would come down, Mark, not so that planes would come down, not so that planes would come down. They fired the FAA. I mean, that this was so poorly reported by the legacy media, okay? They come in, they fire the head of the FAA. Why do they fire the head of the FAA? Because the FAA was investigating Musk for something, or one of the Musk
right.
companies.
No, that's exactly right.
Why did they get rid of USAID? Because USAID's Inspector General was investigating Musk or one of his companies. He's gotten rid of 2 or 3 other people. So like I said, it's a criminal defendant's fantasy, isn't it? To be able to go through and not have them hold you to account, but hold to account your accusers. Wow. What a fantasy for him and Trump.
These guys are playing out their fantasies, and we're way over time, but Dave asks, Mark, if there's time, can you ask Katz about the legalities of sending U.S. citizen prisoners to Salvadoran prisons? I think
that totally, that's beyond the pale. We can't, it's like sending an American to Guantanamo. And as to sending the worst of the worst, the 30,000 worst of the worst to Guantanamo, Trump loves to spend money. If the Democrats ever spent money like Trump spends money, the Republicans would be screaming. But if it's Trump spending the money, can you imagine how much more expensive it is to house a prisoner in Guantanamo, an island that we have to bring all the food and supplies into, rather than somewhere in Texas or Idaho or wherever the prisoner would otherwise be? It's so fun. And Trump liked only one thing about it, because it made no sense, like the Gaza thing. The only thing he liked was sending illegal immigrants Guantanamo, right? And that's what that was another bumper sticker, right? Another bumper sticker, send the bad guys. And, I understand why some of the Democrats voted for it, Mark, but, the Democrats voted for this bill about this, would name for this poor woman who got killed.
Yeah.
And she got killed by someone who was illegally in the country, and he'd been released. But you know what he'd been released for, Mark? Shoplifting. So now this bill says that, everybody should be deported, right down to shoplifting, because if they think if this guy had been denied bail or been deported for shoplifting, Mark, he wouldn't have been denied bail for shoplifting. He wouldn't have been, it just, none of this would have happened. But now, and I understand why they're worried for their seats, the Democrats voted for it, but that is going to increase their ability to arrest people. And the last thing, Mark, is that of that flight that cost $800,000 that should have cost $200,000, but Trump spent the money on that flight, that military flight. Half the people on the flight had not committed any crime. They'd been arrested for no crime. They were just people who'd crossed the border. Yes, they were not entitled to cross the border. That's a civil offense, Mark, civil. But half the people that were getting deported. That was just a show deportation. So, Mark, we're fighting back. I tell you this, there's 2 banana peels there, and Trump wants to stand on both banana peels. Tomorrow he'll stand on a 3rd banana peel. His popularity is plummeting, Mark, and prices are not coming down. Eggs and milk are going up in price.
Sure. I mean, but again, they'll spin everything and they'll make it federal law that we all have to stand on banana peels. I mean, this is crazy. It's a crazy Habsburgian king who's taken over and has the support of a party completely in his thrall. It'll be interesting the moment that it all breaks. You know, there'll be a watershed moment where people go, we can't do this anymore, but it's extraordinary.
Obama had 60 senators. He had a filibuster-proof Senate. He had the House, okay? And the Democrats fought like hell. They fought like hell. Can't Democrats fight like hell? Come on, learn a few things from them. Like this Tuberville guy, he slowed every single appointment down. The Democrats aren't as smart as the coach of the Alabama football team.
That's what I've been saying. I've been saying make life tough. You have the ability to do it, even in the minority. David Katz, we will continue this. There's a couple of questions I want to put to the side until next time, but we have to recess for now.
Okay, Mark, you can't have me every hour you need me, but you can have me next Thursday.
I'm looking forward to it already. Thank you, David Katz. David Katz, everybody.
Great to be with you. Albert Kim, great to be with you.
Yes, hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.